Never assume Chapter 6 will save the story, because the end of Chapter 5 did the opposite. But first, smash that like button and hit the join button down below. If you support me as a channel member, I can make more videos like this. The prototype won the round, Poppy got taken, and the one thing you turned on in the data center was not a weapon, it was the doctor. So, if you are here for the real question, it's not, is Chapter 6 coming? It's, what kind of Chapter 6 are we about to get after that ending? Today, I'm going to walk you through what Chapter 6 will most likely be about, what it needs to answer, who we are almost sure will be in it, what characters might still be alive, where the next chapter could take place, and what the biggest twist could be if Mob wants this to hit like a real final chapter. I'll keep it simple, I'll keep it clear, and I'll keep it focused on one thing the whole time: what will happen next. And I want to start with the most important idea, because it changes how you should look at everything. Chapter 6 will not just be another chapter. It is set up like a recovery mission and a trap at the same time. You are chasing Poppy. You are chasing answers. You are chasing the prototype. But you are also walking into a situation where you might have to trust the least trustworthy brain left in the factory. That alone is enough to carry a whole game. Now, let's rewind to the exact situation Chapter 5 leaves us in, because Chapter 6 can't start anywhere else. At the end of Chapter 5, the prototype takes Poppy and disappears into an unknown part of the factory. The player gets badly hurt, gets submerged into a vat of poppy gel, and has that strange, dreamlike moment where reality feels like it slips. Then the player blacks out. Then the screen literally tells you something that feels like the factory itself is speaking. You are still needed, so get up. And that's when Giblet saves you and tells you the prototype took Poppy to an unknown location. Then you and Giblet go to the data center for the backup, and when you activate it, it isn't a file or a formula. It's Harley Sawyer, the doctor, back as a backup, ending the chapter on that line that basically says, okay, this is interesting. That ending is not just a cliffhanger, it is the blueprint for Chapter 6. Because right there, Chapter 6 already has 3 clear goals, and you can feel them even if the game never says them out loud. One goal is rescue. Find Poppy before whatever the prototype wants to do with her is finished. Another goal is survival. You are not walking into a normal section of the factory now. You are walking into the prototype's home turf. Chapter 5 already showed that the prototype is not a rumor anymore. It has full presence. It hunts. It punishes. It takes what it wants. And the third goal is knowledge. You don't beat the prototype by being brave. You beat it by using the one thing that can counter it: information and a real weakness. That's why the backup matters so much. It's telling you the next chapter will be built around planning, not just running. The chases will still be there, of course. It's Poppy playtime. But the story focus shifts. It becomes a chase with strategy behind it. So the first thing Chapter 6 will probably do is force you into a very uncomfortable partnership. You and Giblet are standing in a data center. The doctor is awake on a screen. Poppy is gone. The prototype is moving. Huggy and Kissy are either dead or left unclear on purpose. And you have no other allies you can trust for sure. So the game will probably ask you this without saying it directly. Are you willing to keep the doctor on? Because the doctor being on is not neutral. When you give power to a system villain, you are not just letting him talk. You are giving him a chance to connect to more systems. Doors, cameras, locks, records, alarms, power routes. Even if he can't move a body, he can move the building. And Chapter 6 can build a lot of tension from that one simple thing. Imagine how that first conversation could go. You need answers. The doctor knows things, but he also loves control. So he won't just hand you the map to Poppy and say good luck. He will test you. He will ask what happened. He will act like he's the smartest person in the room, because in a way, he is. So Chapter 6 will likely start with a deal. Maybe not a spoken deal with a handshake, but a deal in practice. He helps you open a path. You keep him online. He gives you a clue. You do a task for him. He gives you another clue. Every step forward is also you feeding him access. That is a perfect horror setup, because it creates a second villain pressure even while you chase the main villain. The prototype is the big monster outside, the one that can kill you fast. The doctor is the big monster inside the system, the one that can ruin you slowly. And if Mob wants Chapter 6 to feel different from the other chapters, that's how they do it. They make the fear split in two directions. You can't just run away from everything anymore, because one threat is literally in your ear. Now, before we get too deep into what the doctor might do, let's talk about the characters Chapter 6 almost has to include, because the story has backed itself into a corner in a very specific way. Poppy has to be there, because she is the one who got taken. And the game is not going to end the whole story without paying off what Poppy really is, what she knows, and what she still wants. Chapter 5 already pushed new info about Poppy being more than just a doll voice, and that is the kind of lore that is not dropped unless it's going to matter soon. The prototype has to be there, because Chapter 5 finally made it a true present villain. It has voice lines, direct scenes, a visible form, and clear intent. Chapter 6 will likely be the chapter where you stop running from the prototype's shadow and start chasing it on purpose. Giblet has to be there, because he is the only ally you physically have in the real world right now. Chapter 5 built him as the person who wants the prototype dead and actually has a plan. If Chapter 6 is about ending the prototype, then Giblet is not optional. He's the bridge between we want it dead and we can make it dead. And Harley Sawyer has to be there, because the end of Chapter 5 made him the backup, and the story just turned him into the biggest tool on the board. Even if he becomes an enemy again later, he is still part of the path forward. Those four are basically locked in. Now we can talk about the characters who might return. And this is where Chapter 6 gets really interesting, because Mob left a few fates blurry on purpose. Huggy and Kissy are the biggest question marks right now. On screen, it looks brutal. The prototype impales them, and you are forced to run, so you don't get a clean proof moment like a long death scene. And that matters. When a story wants a character to be 100% confirmed dead, it usually gives you a moment that removes doubt. When a story wants you to argue about it for months, it gives you exactly what Chapter 5 gave you. A violent hit, then a forced escape, then characters talking about it in a way that still leaves room for maybe. Some recaps point out that Huggy is still visibly moving after being struck, and that Giblet later admits he doesn't know what happened to Kissy. That combination is basically a big neon sign saying, this is not fully closed. Even if the final answer ends up being, they died, the fact that the game keeps it uncertain means Chapter 6 will almost surely answer it. So what does that mean for Chapter 6? It means one of the early tension beats could be a search for what's left behind. Not even a full rescue, but a truth moment. Are they gone, or are they somewhere else? And that can lead into a bigger theme. The prototype doesn't always kill cleanly. The prototype takes. The prototype collects. The prototype fixes in its own sick way. So if Huggy or Kissy survived, even barely, Chapter 6 could show that survival comes with a price. Like a new form, a new injury, a new role, or even a new loyalty problem. If they are alive, they might not come back as your friend. They might come back as a broken weapon the prototype tried to recontrol. And if they are dead, Chapter 6 might use that loss as fuel. Because you don't end a series like this without using big emotional hits as motivation for the final push. Now let's talk about Lily, because people keep bringing her up. In Chapter 5, Lily's story ends with her being crushed, and the game even throws in that creepy joke about hair growing after death. Some people used that as a reason to think maybe Lily's hair could still be active, even if she isn't. Here's the simpler way to think about it. Lily doesn't have to return as a full character for her stuff to matter again, because Lily's hair was not normal hair. It was basically her weapon system. If the factory can reuse parts, and if the prototype collects parts, then Lily's hair could show up again as material, not as Lily's mind, but as Lily's leftover danger. So, Chapter 6 could still include Lily's influence without bringing Lily back as a living villain. And this ties into something bigger. The prototype and the factory love recycling. Nothing is wasted. Bodies become tools. Tools become traps. Old horrors become new puzzles. Now, another character I really think has a good chance to return is Chum Chompkins. Chum was weirdly underused in Chapter 5. He shows up, has a very strange function, helps in a key moment, and then kind of fades out of focus in a way that doesn't feel like a goodbye. It feels more like a, we'll come back to this. So if Chapter 6 is a long final chapter, Chum is the kind of side character that could become important again, either as a helper, a transport, a hiding spot, or a tragic loss. And that brings us to the other big return category, unnamed experiments. Chapter 5 has documents that mention experiment numbers we have never seen in person. Some of these might just be flavor, like, this is what conditioning does, but Mob has a history of teasing things early and paying them off later. Even in earlier chapters, they use tapes and notes to set up future characters. So when you see a document talking about a strange male creature being conditioned, struggling at first, shouting a name he can't say clearly, then slowly quieting down, then finally repeating joy lines like the conditioning worked, that doesn't feel like random filler. It feels like a seed. And maybe it's just a seed for the theme, not a seed for a boss. But Chapter 6 is exactly where seeds like that can grow into something real. Because a final chapter needs threats that feel earned, not just random new toys. The best final enemies are the ones the story has already hinted at. So if Chapter 6 includes a new experiment, I think it will be one that has been teased in documents before, not just a brand new toy line they invented yesterday. Now let's talk about the location, because where Chapter 6 happens will decide the whole vibe. Chapter 6 almost certainly begins in the data center. That's the cleanest continuation of the ending. You turn on the backup, the doctor is awake, and you are standing in the place where the factory stores its brain. You can't just cut away from that and start in a random hallway with no explanation. The story has to deal with that moment. So picture the start of Chapter 6, like this. You and Giblet are in a room full of dead machines and humming servers. The air feels cold. You can hear power running through cables. There's dust. There are screens that haven't been on in years. And now one of them is on, watching you. That alone is an atmosphere the series has not done in full yet. We've had labs, play areas, prison-like zones, and toy-themed worlds. But a real data center is a different kind of horror. It's horror with silence and blinking lights, the kind of place that feels like it remembers everything. So Chapter 6 can start with a systems-style puzzle section, where the doctor guides you through restoring or routing power, not because he's nice, but because he wants access. And because you need access too. This can also be where the game gives you a new tool, or upgrades your existing helper. One of the coolest ideas people have floated is this. If the doctor can't control a real body anymore, maybe the story gives him a new container by transferring him into something like Globy, the companion light tool from Chapter 5. That would make a lot of sense for gameplay. A talking companion that is also the doctor would be both helpful and terrifying. Helpful because he can guide you, warn you, point out details. Terrifying because he's right there with you, always listening, always commenting, always planning. And it also solves a practical story problem. The doctor is a system mind. If you want him to matter for a whole chapter, you need him to be present. Putting him in your companion tool is a simple way to do that. Now, would that be safe? No. That's the point. If the doctor is in your tool, then he sees everything you see. He hears everything you hear. He learns your habits. He learns your weaknesses. And if you ever try to shut him down, he might already have a backup path. So if Mob wants maximum tension, that's a strong move. Now, after the data center start, Chapter 6 has to move somewhere new, because Chapter 5 already took us through the labs and showed us where experiments get made. That is a huge reveal location. So Chapter 6 needs to top it in a different way. It doesn't need to be deeper in a literal sense. It needs to be wider, bigger, stranger. That's why the most popular location theory right now is so exciting. The caves outside the main structure, with a distant something you can see far off in the background. In Chapter 5, there are parts where you can look out and see huge empty caverns around the building, and way out in the distance, there's something that looks like lights, like structures, like a far-off place that doesn't look natural. If that is intentional, and it almost certainly is, then Chapter 6 could move into an underground outside world. Not outside the factory in sunlight, but outside the factory walls inside the cave system. And that is a perfect final chapter setting, because it can feel like a new world while still staying in the horror tone. Think about it, the factory has been the main setting the whole time. But the deeper you go, the more it starts to feel like it's not just a building. It feels like a whole underground region. Like the company didn't just have one basement, it had a hidden kingdom under it. So Chapter 6, taking you into an underground city, or an underground settlement, or even a fake town built in caves, would make the series feel fresh without breaking what it is. It would also connect to the biggest missing story piece that Chapter 5 keeps pointing at: the orphans. Because where are the orphans? Chapter 4 made it sound like the prototype moved them for safekeeping. Chapter 5 shows that they are not simply waiting in the labs. And then the prototype says something that makes your stomach drop: he sent them to a better place. That line is evil, but it's also vague, and vague lines in story writing are usually meant to be paid off later. So Chapter 6 has a huge job: show us what the better place is. There are two main possibilities, and both are terrifying in different ways. One possibility is the dark one everyone expects. The better place is the operating table. The orphans became new experiments. They became outimals, wrong-side creatures, or brand new monsters. In that case, the better place is just the prototype lying to sound calm while admitting he destroyed their humanity. If that's the answer, Chapter 6 will likely be the most painful chapter, because it would force you to confront the results, not just read about them. The other possibility is the twist possibility. The prototype actually built a hidden safe area, not safe for you, but safe for the orphans, like a weird underground community. A place where the prototype thinks it is doing the right thing, a place with lights, structures, a sort of life. That would explain why you can see something that looks like a distant settlement in the caves. It would explain why the prototype uses home language. It would explain why it talks like a leader, not just a predator. And it would also create a new kind of horror. What if the orphans are alive, but they now believe in the prototype? What if they see it as their protector? What if they don't want to be rescued, because the only world they know is the world the prototype built? That would be heartbreaking and scary at the same time, and it would give Chapter 6 a moral problem, not just a physical problem. Because saving someone is easy in a video game when they clearly want to leave. It's much harder when the person you're trying to save thinks you are the villain. Now here's where Poppy comes into this. Poppy has always been the character who pushes against the prototype's control. She wants freedom. She wants revenge. She wants to end the nightmare. So if the prototype takes Poppy and brings her into this better place, whatever it is, that is not just a kidnapping, it's a move. It's the prototype saying, I'm taking the symbol of rebellion and pulling her back into my world. So Chapter 6 could be built around a very scary idea. Poppy might not be free when you find her. She might be restrained, changed, threatened, or even forced into a role. And that would be a huge story beat, because it would flip the dynamic. For most of the series, Poppy is the one telling you what to do. Even when she's wrong, she's the voice with a plan. If the prototype breaks her, Chapter 6 becomes a story where you lose the planner and have to become the planner yourself, with Giblet and the Doctor as your only guidance. And that is exactly how you make the final chapter feel desperate. You remove the comfort voice. Now let's talk about what Chapter 6 actually needs to answer, because a final chapter can't just add new things, it has to close loops. And Poppy Playtime has a lot of loops. The biggest loop is the player's identity and connection to the factory. Chapter 5 makes the player's survival feel strange. The Poppy gel is not just goo on the floor anymore. The game ties it to regeneration and weird dream states. You literally get submerged in it and come back. The screen tells you that you are still needed. That feels like more than a normal game over moment. So Chapter 6 might finally explain what the player is, or what happened to the player in the past, or why the factory seems to react to the player like a returning part of the system. And this matters for predicting Chapter 6, because if the player has a deeper connection, the prototype might not just want Poppy. The prototype might also want you for a reason. So a big Chapter 6 prediction is that the prototype's plan is not only take Poppy, it's take the pieces it needs. Poppy, maybe you, maybe others. And if that's true, then Chapter 6 might include a moment where the prototype tries to fix you too, the same way it talks about fixing Poppy. Not out of kindness, but out of control. Another loop Chapter 6 has to answer is the true nature of the prototype's weakness. Chapter 5 introduces the idea that the prototype has insane regeneration, and the plot's whole push is about finding something that can shut that down. If the backup is tied to stopping the prototype, then Chapter 6 has to pay that off. So, what could that look like in gameplay? It could look like hunting down a chemical or a formula, then crafting or activating a delivery system. It could look like injecting something into the prototype. It could look like turning off a source that feeds it. Or it could be a trap where you lure it into a chamber and neutralize the regeneration there. But here's the twist. If Harley Sawyer is the key to this weakness, Chapter 6 might make the weakness feel like a puzzle, not a weapon. Because Harley might not just say, "Here's the formula, go stab him." He might say, "To do it, you need access to a lab station, power from a hidden generator, and a tool that can inject through his armor." That means the chapter becomes a series of tasks with a clear end goal. Prepare the one thing that can stop the prototype from healing. That is very final chapter energy. Build the weapon, then use it. Now, another loop Chapter 6 has to answer is the better place line about the orphans. I keep coming back to it because it's too big to ignore. Even if Chapter 6 doesn't show you every single orphan, it has to show you enough that the line stops being vague. That can also tie into why the setting might change. If there is a whole hidden area in the caves, that is the perfect place to put the better place reveal. And if Mob wants the best emotional hit, it could go like this. You spend a big chunk of Chapter 6 chasing Poppy, expecting the prototype's hideout to be a nest of gore and parts. Then, you finally reach it, and you see lights in the distance. You walk closer, and it looks like a town, like structures, like something built, not natural. And then you realize the town is made from toy parts, scrap metal, and old factory pieces, like a fake neighborhood. And you hear voices, not human voices, toy voices, children's voices. That would be one of the creepiest reveals possible because it takes something that should feel safe, like a town with lights, and makes it wrong. It also fits the story's theme perfectly. Poppy Playtime loves fake safety. Playcare is a care place that isn't safe. Sweet Street is sweet, but it's a trap. A city in the caves would be life, but it would be built out of horror. Now let's talk about how the Doctor fits into this, because he's the wild card in all of this. Chapter 6 will have to decide what kind of role Harley Sawyer plays, because there are two big directions, and both are scary. One direction is the forced ally direction. Harley helps because he has no choice. You can shut him down. You control his power. He wants to live, so he cooperates, but he is bitter about it. He guides you, gives you intel, maybe even uses the factory systems to open paths. If this is the direction, Chapter 6 becomes a story about using evil as a tool while trying not to get used in return. The other direction is the trap direction. Harley helps at first, but he is secretly building his own plan, using you as hands. Every puzzle you solve for saving Poppy is also restoring Harley's access, maybe even restoring his ability to move beyond the data center. By the time you realize it, Harley is not just a screen voice anymore. He is a system again. If Mob wants maximum stress, they might combine both directions. Harley helps because it benefits him. That means his advice is real, but it's also poisoned. And this would also create a perfect moment for betrayal, because betrayal in a final chapter hits harder if you spent hours trusting the person. Now let's talk about Giblet, because Giblet is also not a clean hero. Giblet worked under the prototype. Giblet knows the labs. Giblet has his own motivations, and Chapter 5 already shows he can keep secrets. He tells you there is a backup, but he doesn't fully explain it. He focuses on the goal, kill the prototype. So Chapter 6 might also explore what Giblet truly is and what he truly knows. Because if Chapter 6 is the final chapter, it has to answer questions about the people who are still standing. Why did Giblet survive so long? How did he avoid getting fixed into an Audimal? What did he do for the prototype? What did he see? What is his personal stake besides kill the prototype? Chapter 5 hints that Giblet doesn't plan to stay down there forever. That line is not just small talk, it's a goal. He wants out. He wants a future. So Chapter 6 could give Giblet a real ending choice. Does he escape? Does he sacrifice himself? Does he get his revenge? Does he become something else? And if the story wants to be painful, it could do the classic thing where the most loyal ally dies right when you are finally close to winning. I'm not saying that will happen, but it is a very common final chapter move, especially in horror. You remove the helper, so the last stretch feels lonely. Now, let's talk about the cave city idea a little more, because it's the most exciting location theory, and it matches Mob's style. Mob likes to tease future places early. In earlier chapters, the series has used signs, hints, and small background clues to make you think about what's next. So, having a distant settlement in the caves, if it's real, is exactly the kind of tease they would do. And it's also a smart way to keep the franchise feeling fresh. Because if Chapter 6 was just another section of the factory, a lot of people would feel fatigue. Even fans who love the lore can start feeling like the structure repeats. Enter new zone, meet new toy, solve new puzzles, get chased, end on cliffhanger. A new environment that still fits the story would help a lot. A cave settlement does that. It can also give Mob room to build new types of gameplay. Maybe more open paths, not just hallways. Maybe vertical climbing on cave walls using upgraded hands. Maybe power puzzles using distant generators. Maybe hiding in shadows, using light sources, like you already did in the dark Outemal sections. It also ties into one of the most interesting gameplay vibes in Chapter 5. Light matters. Darkness matters. Turning lights on matters. So, an underground city with pockets of light and pockets of pitch black would be a perfect setting for stealth and fear. Now, what does the prototype do in that kind of setting? If the prototype has built a home in the caves, then it might not just chase you like a monster. It might guard, it might patrol, it might send hunters after you. And the prototype already has a theme of sending hunters, controlling others, and using other toys as tools. So Chapter 6 could expand that into something like this. Instead of one big monster always chasing you, you could have smaller threats that act like a security force for the prototype's home. Not robots, living toys, conditioned creatures, Outemals, or even something new. And that would make the prototype feel even more like a ruler. Now, here's another huge clue we can use to predict Chapter 6's direction. Chapter 5's ending doesn't just introduce Harley, it also introduces a sense of timeline urgency. Because Poppy got taken, that implies the prototype is doing something with her right now, not later. So, Chapter 6 can't begin with you wandering around for hours doing random side tasks while Poppy is captured. The story has to feel like you are chasing the clock. That doesn't mean the gameplay won't have puzzles. It will. But the plot needs to keep reminding you, you are behind. And that creates the perfect reason for Harley to exist in the chapter. Harley is the fast path. The guide that can say, stop wasting time, go here. Even if he's lying sometimes, the idea of him is speed. And if he is in a companion tool like Globy, that speeds things up even more. He can talk while you move. Now, I want to lay out what I think the main story path of Chapter 6 could look like, in a way that feels like a real chapter structure, but I'm going to keep it in normal talking style, not like a checklist. I think the beginning of Chapter 6 is the data center section. You stabilize the backup, you get Harley talking, and you and Giblet set the new mission. Track the prototype and find where he took Poppy. Then, Harley points you toward a path the prototype uses. Maybe a service tunnel, maybe an old transit line, maybe a maintenance route that connects to the caves. And to open that path, you have to power something. Because in this series, every important door is locked behind power. So you do early puzzles that restore power to a transit system. Maybe a tram, maybe an elevator, maybe something that moves you out of the data center zone. This also gives Mob a chance to introduce a new hand upgrade early. Because every chapter tends to add at least one new tool function. Then, once you take that transit, you enter the new setting, the caves. The first part of the caves would likely feel empty, huge, and scary, not like the factory hallways, more like open space where you can hear your footsteps echo. This is where the game can build dread slowly. You see strange structures in the distance. You see lights far away. You hear sounds that are not wind. Little movements, like something is living out here. Then you start seeing signs that someone built paths, catwalks, platforms, old rails, cables. It doesn't feel natural. It feels like the company used the caves for something, or the toys used it after the hour of joy. And if you remember earlier lore about the prototype being treated like a god by some toys, the caves could have shrines, like places of worship built from toy parts. That would connect directly to the prototype's home idea. It would also connect to why the story uses capitalized his domain language in Chapter 5 descriptions. So then Chapter 6 could shift into the city reveal. You get closer, you realize it's not just random lights, it's a whole area. And this is where the orphan storyline could hit. Because if the orphans are here, this is where you see the truth. Maybe you see small toy-sized living spaces. Maybe you see drawings. Maybe you see messages on walls. Maybe you see evidence of routine, like a community tried to form. But it won't be cozy. It will be wrong. Because anything built by the prototype will have the prototype's rules in it. And that's where Chapter 6 could do something really scary. It could show that the prototype's better place is a place where the orphans are alive but controlled. Not in cages like a prison, in a home that still has rules, still has fear, still has a leader. That would make the prototype feel like the final villain in the deepest way, because it means the prototype didn't just kill, it replaced the company and became the new authority. Now where does Poppy fit in that? If the prototype brought Poppy here, it could be for one of two reasons. One reason is simple. Poppy is a threat, so he wants her contained where she can't reach the player again. Another reason is more personal. The prototype wants Poppy to be part of this home, like the way it talks about fixing her and confining her to her case again. So Chapter 6 might show Poppy in a new kind of prison, not a metal cell, but a symbolic prison. Like a display case, a homeroom, a place the prototype thinks is correct. And rescuing her might not be a simple open door moment. It might involve breaking a system of rules. This is also where Harley becomes dangerous again, because Harley and the prototype might both want Poppy for different reasons. Poppy is an important experiment. Poppy is tied to the company's origins. Poppy is connected to the lore, and maybe to Elliot Ludwig's secret work. Harley might see Poppy as a resource, not as a person, as a key, a legacy subject. So Chapter 6 could create tension where you, the player, want to save Poppy as an ally, but Harley wants to use Poppy as leverage, and the prototype wants to keep Poppy as possession. So Poppy becomes the center of a three-way conflict. That's a strong final chapter setup. Now, let's address the biggest worry fans have about Chapter 6, because it's real. People worry the series might just repeat itself again. New area, new toy villain, new chase, new cliffhanger. So what would make Chapter 6 feel different? The answer is simple. Chapter 6 needs consequences. It needs to stop adding and start paying off. That means Chapter 6 should answer questions like these, in a direct way. What happened in the hour of joy? In a clear sequence, not just pieces. What the prototype truly is and why it thinks the way it does. Who the player really is and what the player did before. What Poppy Gel truly does and why it matters so much. What happened to the orphans. What the doctor's true goal is, now that he's back. Whether escape is possible, or if ending the nightmare means destroying the factory entirely. And whether ending means a good ending, a bad ending, or a choice. A lot of horror games end with you escaping, but Poppy Playtime might not want that kind of ending. Because the factory is not just a place, it is a system, and systems don't end just because you walked away. So Chapter 6 could end in a bigger kind of final action, like shutting down the factory's life support, or destroying the source of the Poppy Gel, or neutralizing whatever keeps experiments alive. If the prototype's main strength is regeneration and self-repair, then the final kill might be more like cutting off oxygen, not stabbing the heart. And that makes sense with what Chapter 5 introduced. You can't just fight him with brute force. You need a weakness. Now, how does that weakness show up in a final chapter? Here's one clean prediction. Chapter 6 will have a build the counter storyline. That means you spend much of the chapter gathering the parts of a plan. Find where the negation or neutralizing method is stored. Restore the equipment needed to apply it. Create a delivery method. Lure the prototype into the one place where the delivery can work, and then survive the final chase while it happens. That would also give Mob a good reason to use Harley as a guide. He is the one who knows the equipment, the locations, the access codes. But again, every time you use him, you give him power. So Chapter 6 might be built around a big tension line. You need Harley to build the weapon, but the moment the weapon exists, Harley becomes less necessary. And that's when Harley becomes most dangerous, because he knows you'll try to shut him off. So imagine this kind of story moment. You finally assemble the plan to stop the prototype's healing. Then Harley says something like, "Good, now do this next step." But that next step is suspicious. It restores some system beyond what you need. Giblet doesn't like it, but you do it because you think you need it. And then later you realize you didn't need it. Harley needed it. That's a classic betrayal setup. Now, will Harley betray you? I can't say it's guaranteed, because Mob could go the other way and make Harley a temporary ally out of pure survival logic. But I do think Chapter 6 will at least tease betrayal multiple times, because it's the easiest way to keep tension high in slower puzzle sections. Now, let's talk about the will Chapter 6 be the final chapter question, because it affects what we should predict. There is no official release date for Chapter 6 right now, and there is no official clear statement that Chapter 6 is the last one in a way that ends all doubt. But lots of signs point to Chapter 6 being planned as a major continuation, and many people expect it to be the finale for the main story arc, because Chapter 5 ends with the biggest cliffhanger, and because the story has finally moved the prototype into full view. Also, from a simple story structure angle, one more chapter makes sense. Chapter 5 put the prototype on stage and took Poppy away. Chapter 6 would be the answer to that. It would be strange to drag that out for 2 more chapters unless Mob wants a much longer story than most fans expect. So, I think the most realistic prediction is this. Chapter 6 will probably be the last chapter of the main factory story, or at least the last chapter of the first big storyline, and it will aim to feel bigger and longer than the others. If Mob takes extra time to make it a true finale, a release in 2027 seems plausible, but if they want something more polished, it could also slip later. The only honest confirmed thing is that Chapter 6 does not have an official date yet, so any year is still a guess. Now, let's pull this back to what players actually want from Chapter 6, because player desire often hints at what devs will do. People want fewer random toy lines and more focus on core characters. That's a big point. Each chapter adding new failed lines can feel fun, but it can also feel like noise. A final chapter should reduce noise and increase meaning. So if Chapter 6 introduces new threats, I think they will be fewer in number and deeper in purpose. More like, this was hinted earlier, less like, here's a new mascot. That's why a teased experiment like 1268 could matter, because it feels like it exists to show what conditioning does, and Chapter 6's likely setting might revolve around conditioning outcomes. If the orphans are part of a better place community, conditioning would matter a lot. It decides loyalty, it decides identity, it decides who thinks they are a toy and who remembers being a person. So Chapter 6 could make conditioning the real horror, not just the monsters. Monsters are scary, but mind control is scarier in a story like this because it takes away choice. And that leads to another major Chapter 6 prediction. The chapter might force the player to deal with moral choices, even if the game doesn't present them as a menu. For example, you might have to choose between saving Poppy quickly or saving evidence about the orphans. You might have to choose between keeping Harley on to open a path or shutting him down to prevent him from gaining access, even if that slows you down. You might have to choose between following Giblet's direct kill the prototype plan or following Poppy's more careful plan if Poppy returns with a different perspective after being captured. And those kinds of choices make a final chapter feel real. Now, there is one more thing in Chapter 5 that I think will matter a lot in Chapter 6, and it's easy to miss because it's not a character. It's the gel. The gel is everywhere in Chapter 5. It's not just a puzzle blockage. It's tied to regeneration. It's tied to body change. it's tied to survival. And Chapter 5 ends with you being submerged in it and coming back. That is not a random visual. So Chapter 6 could expand gel mechanics. Maybe you can use gel to heal in small ways. Maybe gel exposure triggers memory flashes. Maybe gel changes how you survive fatal hits. Or maybe the prototype uses gel as a weapon, like a way to trap you, sink you, and keep you alive while you suffer. If Chapter 6 is the finale, the gel is likely part of how the finale ends. Either you neutralize it, drain it, burn it, freeze it, or use its opposite to stop the prototype. So the final plan might not just be kill the prototype. It might be end the gel source. Now, let's talk about what the final boss moment could look like, because you asked what will happen, and the ending of Chapter 6 is the biggest happen of all. If the prototype's regeneration is real, then the final fight can't be a normal fight. It has to be a multi-step trap. Picture something like this. You lure the prototype into an old chamber, maybe a facility built for experiments, maybe a containment room, maybe a giant press, maybe a chemical neutralization bay. You activate the negation effect, the thing that stops the regeneration. And then, for the first time, the prototype is actually vulnerable. That's when you get the real boss sequence. Not just chasing, not just running. A true final struggle where the prototype is angry, desperate, and losing its unfair advantage. And that's also when Poppy's role becomes critical, because Poppy has personal history with the prototype. If Chapter 6 wants a strong emotional payoff, Poppy needs a direct moment, not just being saved like an object, but speaking, choosing, and confronting. So Chapter 6's climax could include a face-to-face scene where Poppy rejects the prototype's home talk, rejects the fix you idea, and chooses freedom even if it hurts. But here's the horror twist possibility. What if the prototype doesn't just want Poppy back? What if it needs Poppy for something? For example, what if Poppy's experiment status makes her a key to controlling the factory's systems, like a legacy access? Or, what if Poppy is needed to complete a process that gives the prototype a new form? Or, what if Poppy is needed as a symbol to control the orphans, like a queen of the better place? If any of those are true, then saving Poppy is not just saving a friend, it's stopping the prototype from leveling up. So, Chapter 6 might have a mid-game reveal that Poppy's capture is part of a bigger plan, and you are behind schedule. That would raise stakes fast. Now, where does Harley fit into the final fight? This is where I think Chapter 6 could do something really cool and really scary at the same time. Harley might be the one who tells you how to kill the prototype, but he might also be the one who wants the prototype gone so he can take control of the factory again. So imagine the final sequence after the prototype is defeated or trapped. You think it's over. Then Harley says something like, "Now we can fix everything." And you realize, fix in Harley's mouth means something else. It might mean he wants to restart the system, restart the experiments, use the orphans, use the gel, build his golden path, and suddenly you understand the real final choice. Do you shut Harley down permanently, even if it costs you the last bits of knowledge? Or do you let him live and risk the nightmare starting again under a different ruler? That would be a perfect final chapter twist, because it means the series ends not just with a monster dying, but with a decision about power. And it also fits the theme. Playtime Co.'s real evil was not one creature. It was the mindset that people are materials. The prototype represents that mindset turned into a monster. Harley represents that mindset as a human brain in a machine. So a true ending might require ending both forms. Now, I want to do something that's really helpful for predicting Chapter 6. I want to list the big mysteries that Chapter 6 could answer, but I'm going to say it in a normal way, like you and I are talking, not like a wiki page. The first mystery is the player. Who were you before you came back? Why do you keep surviving? Why does the factory feel like it recognizes you? Why does the story keep hinting at guilt? The second mystery is Poppy's true nature. How much does she remember? Is she only a doll mind, or is she the human girl's memory? Why does the prototype treat her like his in a personal way? Why is her experiment number so close to other key experiments? The third mystery is the orphans. Did they die? Did they become experiments? Are any of them still themselves? Is there a community? Is there a better place that is actually a prison with lights? The fourth mystery is the prototype's goal, not just control. What is the next step? What is the case or plan it wants Poppy for? Is it building something bigger? The fifth mystery is Harley's real role. Is he truly needed to kill the prototype? Was he stored as a backup on purpose as the counter? Or is he a backup that got activated by mistake and now he sees an opening? The sixth mystery is how to end it without restarting it. If you kill the prototype but leave the gel, the factory might still make new horrors. If you drain the gel but leave Harley, he might rebuild. If you shut down Harley but fail to stop the prototype, you lose. So Chapter 6 might end with a burn the roots choice, not just a kill the monster moment. Now, let's get more specific and talk about what Chapter 6 might show in terms of scenes and gameplay beats, because you asked what will happen, not just what might be revealed. I think we will get an early chapter moment where Harley proves he is useful. Like, right away. Because Mob can't bring him back and then make him useless for the first hour. They need players to accept his presence. The fastest way to do that is to have him open a door you can't open, or reveal a route you can't find, or warn you of a threat you would have walked into. So I can see Chapter 6 doing something like this. You and Giblet argue about keeping Harley on. Then, before you decide, something attacks. Maybe an Audimal pack, maybe a security trap, maybe the prototype's hunters. You need to escape, but the door is locked. Harley says a code or reroutes power and saves you in a way that feels real. Now you hate him, but you also know he can keep you alive. That creates the perfect uncomfortable partnership. Then, the chapter slowly raises the cost of keeping him alive. Maybe he asks you to restore a network switch, then another, then another. Each one gives him more reach. You keep telling yourself you're doing it for Poppy, but you are also building Harley's power. That is a very clean way to create tension across a 30 to 45 minute chapter. Now, another big gameplay beat could be dealing with the prototype's control over the environment. In Chapter 5, the prototype feels like it's always near. In Chapter 6, it might feel like it owns the space. That could mean more environmental traps that seem designed by the prototype, not by the company. For example, a section where lights turn off and you have to move only in safe zones because the Audimals roam in darkness. Or a section where the prototype's hunters search for you and you need to hide, not in lockers, but in weird places like inside Chum's belly style hiding, because Mob likes those tense, silly moments. Or a section where the prototype communicates through speakers, ordering toys to move, like a ruler issuing commands. The point is, Chapter 6 should make the prototype feel like a king in his home. Now, let's talk about the city again, because if it exists, the chapter can use it in two different ways. One way is as a fake safe zone, like Playcare. You enter, and it feels calm for a minute. You see lights, you see shapes that look like buildings, and then you learn the rules. You learn you can't leave. You learn the residents are watched. You learn the prototype has eyes everywhere. The other way is as a war zone, like a place already damaged, already broken, where you have to cross through while being hunted. Both would work, but I think the first way is more unique. A safe city that slowly reveals it's not safe at all. That also lets the game add a new type of horror, social horror. What I mean is, imagine seeing toys that are not attacking you right away. They just stare, they whisper, they hide, they act like a community. That would be scarier than a chase, because it feels like you are walking into someone else's life. And then you realize their life is built on obedience. Now, what about new villains? If Chapter 6 adds a major new villain, I think it will be connected to the orphans and conditioning, not just a random toy line. It could be a leader figure in the better place, like a toy that the prototype uses as a voice to control the group. Or it could be an experiment teased in documents, like 1268, as a conditioned success that sings about joy. A creature that acts happy but is actually dangerous. Or it could be something from the prison lore, like a failure experiment number that was never shown, finally being revealed as a hidden danger the company locked away. A final chapter often pulls out the "we never talked about this thing" monster, because it gives the feeling of the factory having secrets even deeper than you thought. But again, I hope Mob keeps it focused. Too many new faces can dilute the ending. Now, let's talk about what Chapter 6 might do with the theme of eyes. This is a fun one, because a lot of fans have noticed eye imagery around the series, and even if you ignore rumors, the Doctor returning as a screen eye fits that theme. If Harley is watching through cameras, that's eyes. If the prototype wants eyes everywhere, that's eyes. If the orphans are being watched in the better place, that's eyes. So Chapter 6 could lean into surveillance horror, where the fear is not only being chased, but being seen. Imagine a section where you must move through the cave city while avoiding camera cones, like a stealth puzzle, because the Doctor tells you the prototype has security. Or a section where you must shut down camera nodes, but shutting down nodes also shuts down Harley's view, and he gets angry because you're blinding him too. That would create a great conflict between Harley and the player. You want privacy. He wants vision. And the prototype wants vision. So eyes become the war. Now, let's address the release window quickly because you asked for what will happen and when is part of what people care about. Chapter 5 released on the 18th of February 2026. There is no confirmed date for Chapter 6 yet. Most predictions based on past timing say 2027 is the earliest reasonable guess, with 2028 possible if development takes longer. And honestly, if Chapter 6 is meant to be a true finale, extra time would be a good sign, not a bad sign. Because the finale chapter has to do more work than any other chapter. It has to close storylines, deliver the biggest set pieces, and satisfy players who have waited years. So if Mob takes longer, that could mean they are trying to land the ending properly. Now, let's get into the biggest single prediction I have, the one I think will define Chapter 6 more than anything else. I think Chapter 6 will force you to choose what ending even means. Does ending mean you escape? Or does ending mean you destroy the factory? Or does ending mean you free the toys? Or does ending mean you kill the prototype, even if everything else stays broken? Because Chapter 5 already hints that freedom is complicated. The toys are not just victims. Some are loyal to the prototype. Some have become predators. Some might see the factory as home. So, ending the nightmare might not be as simple as opening a door and walking out. That's why the Cave City idea is so powerful. It creates a world that feels like it could continue without you. It creates the feeling that the factory's horror became a society. So Chapter 6 might end with you deciding whether to burn that society down to stop the prototype, or to try to free it, or to leave it sealed. And Harley and Giblet could represent opposite sides of that. Giblet wants the prototype dead, at any cost. Harley might want the prototype dead so he can control the factory. Poppy might want freedom for everyone, even if it's harder. And the player might just want to survive and stop feeling guilty. That is a strong set of goals that can collide in a final chapter. Now, let's talk about the most important scene Chapter 6 could have, the scene that would make the whole series feel complete. The confrontation scene where the prototype's home story gets challenged. In Chapter 5, the prototype talks like it built a home, and Poppy betrayed it. It uses the language of family and protection, but its actions are violent and controlling. That is a classic abusive villain pattern. So, Chapter 6 could have a scene where Poppy finally speaks back, not as a hostage, but as the person who refuses to be owned. And if Mob wants to make people feel something, they'll let Poppy say a simple line that destroys the prototype's fantasy. Something like, "This isn't a home, it's a cage." That would hit hard, because it's simple. Then, to raise stakes, the prototype could react like a true controlling leader, not sad, angry, like a king being challenged. And that's where the final fight becomes not just physical, but ideological. Freedom versus control. Now, where does the player fit in that confrontation? That depends on what the player is revealed to be. If the player is a former employee, the prototype might treat them like the old enemy. If the player is more than that, if the player is tied to the gel or experiments, the prototype might treat them like a lost piece. Either way, Chapter 6 should pay off the player's return vibe. The factory saying welcome home in earlier nightmares, the gel hallucinations, the feeling of being needed. So another major prediction is that Chapter 6 will finally show us a memory or record about the player's past. not just a hint, a real piece of identity. Maybe through a machine, like the memory replay tech in Chapter 5. Maybe through Harley, who recognizes something and slips up. Maybe through Poppy, who finally says what she remembers. And that reveal could change the ending, because if the player is guilty in a big way, the ending could be bittersweet. Like you stop the prototype, but you don't get a clean, happy escape. Now, let's also talk about the possibility of multiple endings, because fans keep thinking about it. Mob has not made a clear promise of multiple endings in this series, but it's a very common final chapter feature, especially in horror games where choices matter. Even if there aren't multiple endings like a menu choice, there could be multiple outcomes based on actions. For example, whether you saved certain characters, whether you kept Harley online too long, whether you found certain documents, whether you built the weapon the right way. That could give replay value and also make the finale feel like it respects the player. So, I wouldn't be shocked if Chapter 6 ends with at least 2 major outcomes, like a bad and good style outcome, even if they aren't named that. And here's an even darker twist. What if the prototype is the one who set the trap? Because Chapter 5 ends with you turning on the doctor backup. But what if the prototype expected you to do that? What if the prototype wanted Harley online again? Because Harley draws you in deeper. Because Harley gives you confidence. Because Harley helps you build a weapon that the prototype can steal. That kind of twist would be so evil and so on brand for a smart puppet master villain. It would turn the backup into bait. And that would be the most painful kind of story move. You thought you found the key, but you were opening a door for the villain. So Chapter 6 might include a moment where you realize the prototype has been one step ahead, and Harley isn't just a tool, he's a trap piece too. Now, I don't want to make this sound like everything is hopeless, because a final chapter has to give you a path. So here's the hopeful side of the prediction. I think Chapter 6 will finally give you a real way to hurt the prototype. Not just run from it, hurt it. Chapter 5 already shows it can bleed. It can be forced to flee. It can be shocked by attacks. It isn't untouchable. So Chapter 6 will likely build on that and give you a plan that turns the tables. That might be the coolest feeling in the whole series, if Mob does it right. The moment where you stop being the hunted and start being the hunter. And that's where Giblet shines, because Giblet's whole purpose is to help you fight back. So I think Chapter 6 will include at least one section where you and Giblet work together in a more direct way. Not just him telling you to do stuff, but actual teamwork. Maybe he distracts something. Maybe he opens a path. Maybe he uses his cane shock again. Maybe he sacrifices himself. I don't know the exact form, but the teamwork needs to be real if the chapter is going to feel like a finale. Now, let's also not forget the Doctor's most interesting possible role in a final battle, turning the factory itself against the prototype. Because Harley is a systems mind, if he can access security, power routing, door locks, and old lab systems, he could potentially trap the prototype in a chamber. And that would be a huge payoff. The company built cages, the company built labs, the company built systems for control. If you can take control back, even for a moment, you can use the company's own tools to stop the monster that replaced it. That is poetic. But again, there's always a cost. Harley helping you control the factory means Harley is closer to becoming the factory again. So every big win against the prototype could also be a step toward Harley becoming the next puppet master. That's why Chapter 6's tension is so good. It's not just fight the final boss, it's fight the final boss without creating a new final boss. Now, I want to circle back and give you a clear, simple, most likely story prediction, like if I had to bet on the broad shape of Chapter 6, what would I say? I would say Chapter 6 starts with Harley being activated and immediately proving useful. You and Giblet form a rough plan to find where the prototype took Poppy. Harley leads you through system puzzles and power routing to open a path out of the data center. You travel into a new region, most likely the caves beyond the factory structure, where you discover evidence of a distant settlement or built area. The chapter explores the truth behind the prototype's "better place" line about the orphans, either revealing a hidden community or revealing a new level of horror where the orphans were turned into experiments. You track Poppy through this space while dealing with new threats that feel more loyal to the prototype than random. You build or retrieve the key method to stop the prototype's regeneration and set up a trap or final confrontation zone. You rescue Poppy, but the rescue comes with consequences, maybe injury, maybe change, maybe a new reveal about who she is. The final sequence uses the weakness plan to make the prototype vulnerable, leading to the biggest chase and fight in the series. Then, after the prototype is defeated or contained, the story turns to the real ending choice: what to do with the factory, what to do with Harley, and what freedom looks like for the survivors. That is the cleanest big picture. Now let's add some spicy but still grounded possibilities, because you want a long video and people love theory branches. Branch 1. Huggy returns in Chapter 6 as a damaged survivor. If Huggy is alive, Chapter 6 might use him as a surprise help, maybe saving you in one moment because he is still calm when he sees Kissy, or because something in him changed after the reunion. That would be a huge emotional payoff. It would also be a perfect hope beat before the final darkness. Branch 2. Kissy returns, but not fully. If Kissy is alive, she might be badly hurt, slow, or changed. And that could turn her into the final sacrifice moment, where she helps rescue Poppy or helps stop the prototype, but doesn't make it out. Branch 3. Huggy and Kissy are dead, and Chapter 6 uses their fate as a driving reason for Poppy's final rage. Poppy losing her closest allies could turn her from planner into force. It could be the emotional push that makes Poppy confront the prototype directly. Branch 4. The city in the caves is a real toy society, and the orphans are alive but loyal. This is the creepiest branch because it creates a moral fight. You can't just kill your way through kids. You have to solve the problem without becoming a monster. Branch 5. The better place is a lab graveyard, and the orphans became experiments. This is the darkest branch, and it would make Chapter 6 very heavy, because it would force the player to see the cost of everything. Branch 6. Harley tries to take control at the end. This is almost too perfect to ignore. Harley as the backup is a gift and a curse. If he is still hungry for control, Chapter 6's ending could be him trying to lock down the factory and keep everyone inside under a new doctor rule, even after the prototype is gone. Branch 7. The prototype used the doctor backup as bait. This is the clever villain branch. The prototype is not dumb. If it expected you to activate the backup, it might have planned around that. It might want you to build the weakness for it. If Mob does this, it would be one of the most shocking twists in the series, and it fits the prototype's puppet master vibe. Now, what about the title, What Will Happen in Chapter 6, as a promise to the viewer? Here's how you keep the viewer hooked for the whole video. You keep repeating this open loop. The better place is the real mystery, and Chapter 6 will reveal it. You keep reminding them that Poppy is captured right now, so time matters. You keep teasing that Harley is the most dangerous ally possible. And you keep hinting that the final chapter might not end with a happy escape, but with a big decision. That's the energy Chapter 6 is set up for. Now, I'll end by saying what I think the single biggest moment of Chapter 6 will be, the moment people will talk about the most. I think it will be the moment you finally see what the prototype considers home. Not just a room, not just a nest, not just a tunnel. A place where the prototype thinks it saved people. Because that will explain everything about why it talks the way it talks, why it takes Poppy, why it says better place, why it hates outsiders, and why stopping it is not just a fight, but breaking a belief. And once you see that home, Chapter 6 becomes simple in a scary way. Either you break it, or it keeps growing. Subscribe.